So trustees, the last item on the agenda is on school changes, guiding principles. Dr. Cruz?
Thank you, President Rodriguez and board members. So for this particular item, which is up for action for the board, it is around making sure that we're providing 21st century learning spaces for as many students as we can, as fast as we can. Something that's coming up this next school year. So we will, many times if a school district opens 1 or 2 schools, that's a lot. Next school year, we will open 7 schools, new or fully modernized or a portion of a modernization. So in January 2020, we're looking at opening T.A. Brown, Menchaca, and Go Valley. So I'm sort of saying this from a TS, make sure that we're always on schedule. He says, yep, we're on schedule, right? In August of 2020, we're looking at opening New Blazer Relief, the New Southwest Elementary, Doss, and Norman. That total construction is a little over $250 million of new modernized spaces for our students. That's implementing the bond and keeping the promise, trying to get as many students as we can in 21st century learning spaces as fast as we can. In January 2021, a year later, we're looking and on schedule to open Murchison. Tomorrow's a groundbreaking, but Murchison and Richards in August of 2021, Rosedale, Eastside Memorial High School, partial for Hill, and Sanchez. That construction costs at over $255 million. For January 2022, New Health Profession School. For August of 2022, Bowie, partial Austin, Kpis, Brentwood, and the new Northeast Middle School at over $266 million of construction costs. In the past, since 2009, we've opened 5 schools total since 2009. So just trying to put this into perspective, what is it that we're trying to do here? And so what do these guiding principles even represent? But just going back, since 2009, we've opened 5 schools. Gariski, Baldwin, Uphouse, Guerrero Thompson, and Padron, with a little construction of a little over $128 million. The guiding principles will help us make decisions. I wanted to come back to level set expectations. We are providing 21st century learning spaces for our students. We are implementing the bond. There's a lot of complexity in implementing the bond because we're looking at academics, we're looking at achievement, we are looking at other facility conditions and educational suitability. We're trying to prepare students and make a lasting impact for 10 to 20 years, not just next year or the year after. It will impact different boundary changes. That's been one of the questions that's come up. Just by implementing the bond, we have to address boundary changes. There's a new Southwest Elementary, a new Southeast Blazer Relief, and the new Northeast Middle School. So even when we didn't want to do boundaries, we have to, because those 3 call for it. So there's a different strategy to solve a different problem across the entire district, but nonetheless, those are at a minimum items that we need to address. The good news is also that we're not doing this alone. We're doing this with our community, but also the city of Austin with our mayor, our council member Tobo, passing a resolution to work with the school district and then perhaps repurpose a facility. That facility may be around housing, recreation, open spaces, or a combination thereof. So President Rodriguez, just wanted to bring back the guiding principles back to the board. Wanted to put in and contextualize a little bit more because that one standalone document sort of sounds like what's it about. It is connected to the implementation of the bond and preparing students for their futures and making sure they're going to be successful. The guiding principles will just show a perspective. It's not the end. We have to apply the guiding principles, bring it back to the board, and the board will make decisions based on what we have. We may have to modify them, but we at least want to know, is this the right direction? So with that, we open it up to board discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Secretary Ellens, do you have a motion to approve agenda item 13.2?
I do. I make a motion that the Board of Trustees approve the guiding principles for the school changes process work as recommended by the administration.
So is there a second?
Second.
Trustee Tice seconds it. Is there a discussion? Let me see. I started on the left. I'll start. Trustee Ellens, since you made the motion, I'll recognize you first, and then Trustee Tice, and then Trustee Wagner,
Oh.
and then Trustee Anderson, and then Trustee Trustee Matthias, and then Trustee Singh. Sorry, I'm trying to get all the names out. Trustee Ellen?
Okay. So I want to be upfront and let people know that the Board of Trustees have been working on this document for about 5 months. And while that may seem excessive, I think it's important to know that we're all coming at this from a different point in the learning curve, and we all had to kind of get our footing. So this has allowed new trustees, as well as the community to get up to speed on what's happening, not only in our school district, but in our city, in our state, and in really the nation that is driving and affecting what's happening in our schools. This time has also enabled the board to call out equity by name and to own the direction that the district takes in applying its equity lens to this work. In fact, the purpose of this document was originally to ensure that the school change process is implemented with thought and care around issues of equity, customer service, student success, and the academic vision that all students in Austin ISD deserve the highest quality schools, teachers, and coursework to prepare them for the yet-to-be-known challenges that they will face in their college, career, and life pursuits. Now, if you recall, the Facility Master Plan adopted a few years ago set this work in motion. However, when purely using data to inform decisions, we ended up with some concerns around disproportionate impact. So don't think we've started all over. We're going to use all the input and the data and the information that was gleaned during that earlier work. But what we have before us today is a way to balance the data with the community, board, and the district values. So this document represents the views of the board and the community as evidenced by the changes that have been made since the process began in January. While it may not hit every nuance that each individual trustee or community group might like to see, it does capture what the majority of trustees and the public have vocally supported over this time. It is equity arrived at thoughtfully. It is important for every one of us on this board, in this room, and watching online or beyond to realize this document is not a checklist and it is not a priority list. It is instead a gut check, that if you will, so that it can be used to overlay a very data-driven process. It's for internal use, meaning that the administration will use it to give direction or to get direction when they reach a crossroads in their decision-making. So thank you for your patience in allowing us to get here. And I believe the work is also going to set us in the right direction for our 2020-2025 strategic plan. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ellens. Trustee Teish?
Thank you, Trustee Ellens. Very eloquent. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the context that you've offered. I support the guiding principles, but I would like to make 2 amendments, and I know that we'll have to vote on each one of those amendments. The first one is an addition under Roman numeral 2, which would be letter I believe. And that amendment would say, strengthen and stabilize student population levels within feeder patterns by promoting socioeconomically balanced schools. So that is my first amendment, which is actually an addition to Roman numeral 2.
So Todd, that is a motion to amend the motion. So we have to have a second for it and then have discussion around it in order to do that. So Trustee Teish, again, you're making a motion to amend the document.
Correct.
And can you repeat 2I again that you're
Correct.
proposing?
I will be glad to do that. Strengthen and stabilize student population levels within feeder patterns by promoting socioeconomically balanced schools.
Question, we're hearing 2I, I'm not seeing a 2G.
That's H, I'm sorry, not I.
Okay.
H, thank you.
Actually, it's.
So it's actually amending 2G. Is that right? Trustee
Okay,
Teish?
yes, sorry about the confusion. Yes, it would be amending letter G under 2.
By promoting socioeconomic.
By promoting socioeconomically balanced schools.
Balanced goals. Okay. So we have a motion to amend the motion
Happy to second that.
by adding to item 2G. Trustee Matthias has seconded the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment to the motion? Trustee Wagner and then Trustee Matthias.
I think the one caution I would encourage my fellow trustees to view this through is that if we only choose to strengthen and stabilize student population levels within feeder patterns, and the only way we choose to do that is by promoting socioeconomically balanced schools, yes, that is something I think that we've touched on in other places, but if we limit that strengthening and stabilization within feeder patterns, we could be inadvertently weakening other options within the district at the same time. So I think it's just very important to think about the two sides of that coin and making sure that we're not inadvertently limiting the trajectory of a school to be successful by tailoring that so narrowly.
So Trustee Matthias?
For that reason, I would be supportive of having this as a letter H. If Trustee Tyke wanted to pull down that motion, I'd be happy to support the adding. I think it's important for us to have that. One of the visuals shared with us during public comment by the first speaker, if I'm not mistaken, shows essentially that we have 97 schools here in the Austin ISD that are either primarily poor or that are primarily rich. There's nothing in the center. What I'm hearing Trustee Tyke suggest is that this amendment to the motion would allow us to help to pool students and schools into a more integrated situation. That is something I could definitely support.
So Trustee Matthias, just to clarify, so are you proposing an edit to her motion?
I didn't
or-
make the motion, but I'm happy to suggest that it be, if we were to take down that motion, I'm happy to take down my second in order to put it up as a separate letter in line with what Trustee Wagner is telling us, that there are other ways to strengthen and stabilize student population levels apart from what's being proposed by Trustee Tyke.
So I would be interested in hearing your substitute motion before I agree.
Do we have the language that you proposed?
So while
No.
Trustee Matthias puts together the draft language, Trustee Teish, I know Trustee Cindy Anderson had a question, so I'm gonna recognize her while Trustee Matthias is doing that.
Trustee Tyke, can you help clarify what you're looking for differently by either modifying G or considering an alternative amendment from Trustee Wagner or Matthias, and what's currently listed in 3A? Because in terms of, I guess, the direction that we give to the administration and how you're looking for them to interpret what already exists differently, I'd like, if you could help me better understand what it is you're hoping that they would do differently by doing that relative to what's currently there.
I would require a couple of minutes to study that, and then I'll be glad to answer. Thank you.
Okay, so let me recognize Trustee Matthias.
While Trustee Tyke is looking at that, I might propose that letter H would read simply, promote socioeconomically balanced schools. The change that I'm suggesting would take the clause that Trustee Tyke had suggested by promoting socioeconomically balanced schools and simply changing the by promoting to promote, and then using the same last three words that she had suggested.
So Trustee Wagner, would that?
Go ahead.
Oh, Trustee Wagner, did you have a question?
Well, I wondered back to Trustee Anderson's note here. I mean, we have 3A that is talking about optimizing opportunities for socioeconomic diversity. So that, it is semantics, but I think it's important semantics in this case. Are we seeking socioeconomic diversity while balancing proximity to neighborhood schools? Or are we simply seeking to have balanced socioeconomic schools? because those could mean different methodologies when it comes to how our administration approaches solutions. So I think it's a worthwhile hair to split, so to speak.
So, Trustee Matthias?
I'm happy to split that hair with you and to move it to 3A, if amenable to Trustee Tyke, such that 3A might read, optimize opportunities for socioeconomic diversity and promote socioeconomically balanced schools while balancing proximity to neighborhood schools.
That is a big old bullet.
Was that a yes, Trustee White?
If I could provide some rationale, I'm happy to move it
Sure.
to Section 3. So Section 2 is putting more students into reimagined 21st century learning environments. In my estimation, it fits less. It's less closely aligned with number 2 and more with the idea of number 3, and especially what we hear in 3A.
So thank you for the rationale, Trustee Matthias. Trustee Wagner, do you have any comments? Or if not, I will recognize Trustee Teish.
There's an important note in 3A, and that is while balancing proximity to neighborhood schools. Because as we all recognize that we live in one of the most economically segregated cities in the nation. So that's, I think, a very important distinction to continue to make. And that's one, as I'm poking at this, I mean, are we indicating that our highest priority is essentially crosstown busing to make that happen? Or are we talking about preserving neighborhood and neighborhood schools, and what types of attendance boundaries are we talking about? How are we going to effectuate those things? So I think those things start to get called into reason when we start to look at things like proximity to neighborhood schools. So those are things that I just want to be mindful of, that even though that language, we can cram everything into that one bullet, but the more that we cram in there, the more I think we start to obfuscate what we're looking for administration to seek as its highest priority. So I don't know exactly what the right answer is in terms of the right language, but I call it out because I feel like the two things on the table in terms of motions are potentially in conflict, or I guess a motion and suggested language could potentially be in conflict not only with each other and also with the language that we currently have in there.
So, Trustee Teish, as the author of the amendment, I yield the floor to you.
Thanks. So I think I could pull down the motion. I'd be willing to do that, but I would like to have some assurance that we're promoting socioeconomically balanced schools. And if we can put that into 3A, and I'm also open to removing neighborhood schools and stating while balancing proximity from home to school. So I'm open to what Trustee Matthias has suggested, that we collapse that into 3A. But I am very concerned that unless we say something specifically about promoting socioeconomically balanced schools, that we'll lose sight of that. So I think we need to have that in there. So Trustee Matthias, could you say once again what you were suggesting for 3A?
I'd be happy to. In 3A, what I'm suggesting is that between the words diversity and while, the following words would be inserted: and promote socioeconomically balanced schools, such that the new sentence, or the new letter A would read, optimize opportunities for socioeconomic diversity and promote socioeconomically balanced schools while balancing proximity to neighborhood schools.
So I would accept that language, except that I would amend it to, rather than saying proximity to neighborhood schools, I would say proximity from home to school. If Trustee Matthias is willing to accept that.
I'm happy to second your motion.
Okay.
So I'm going to restate that because I got it. I got it.
Yes.
But I saw Trustee Singh. Do you have a comment about this particular amendment? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Well, if you-
So,
Sure.
sorry. Well, and it is related. The motion I was going to make is actually very related. I was actually going to suggest promoting 3A to 3, so that we flip-flop 3A and then the main one, and so if we take your longer version and promote that,
As number
would
three.
that be as number 3, as the number 3 heading? Is that something that
So-
we could consider?
I think that would give me assurance that we're asking staff to move in the direction of socioeconomically balanced schools. And I think that elevates it to a higher level, so I would be agreeable to that.
So let me just get clarity from Todd. So Todd, do I need to ask Trustee Tice to rescind the amendment that motion that she made? Or, well, she can rescind it because there's been a second to it. We're in discussion. So can she rescind it, or do we need to vote it down and then consider another motion to the amendment of what we're all kind of describing now?
You've got a lot of things going on, and you've got a
Yes.
lot of options.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the cleanest is to have an up or down vote on Trustee Tyke's original motion.
You,
Yeah, it's all. No?
it's not working.
You have a lot of options. The first is an up or down vote on Trustee Tyke's original motion, because there was never an amendment to that motion. There was never a subsequent motion to amend
Mhm.
the amendment. That said, with unanimous consent, if the presiding officer asks if the board has consent for Trustee Tyke to concede to Trustee Singh and Matthias's additions, I would simply ask that one of them rephrase what the motion that Trustee Tyke can consent to now, if the overall board consents to that process at your direction or request, President Rodriguez.
So, trustees, do you consent to kind of us changing this motion and amending it, or do you want to just vote on the particular amendment that was just made and then we consider
Other possible
other
motions.
possible motions?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can still discuss it,
Okay.
but I kind of want to have a sense of what motion we're doing. So I can restate it if that's helpful. Or what would you like to do? Restate it? Okay, so Trustee Teish, with a second from Trustee Matthias, made a motion to amend the motion by creating a section, by amending section 2G by adding to strengthen and stable student population levels within feeder patterns by promoting socioeconomic balanced schools. In the subsequent discussion, Trustee Teish has agreed to change the language to make a motion to add to section 3A and change the wording there to say optimize opportunities for socioeconomic diversity and promote socioeconomic balanced schools while balancing proximity from home to schools.
So the board's options are to consider the second one by unanimous consent, or to take an up-down vote on Trustee Tyke's original motion.
So without objection, if we can consider the second motion to amend the document, then we can have discussion on that one.
Well, it's not a second motion. It's what the board is allowing Trustee Tyke to now convert her motion to amend to.
Got it. Trustee Tice?
If it's cleaner for everybody, we can do an up or down vote on my very first one, and then we can move to the second one. That might be a cleaner way to do
Okay.
things, so I'm cool with that.
Okay. So is there any discussion on the motion from Trustee Teish to add to 2G by promoting socioeconomic balanced schools? Any Trustee Ellens?
Well, there could be a misleading thing here because if there are people that want to discuss this issue more, I mean, if that motion passes, the discussion is over.
I think the idea is to vote up or down on this original one, so
Right.
then we can consider another amendment
But if
to
it,
the motion.
if it passes, the discussion is over because it is passed.
That would be true, so
So
does,
that's why I'm just checking
yeah.
to make sure.
Does anyone wanna have more discussion on that original amendment to the motion?
I'm so confused. I have thoughts and feelings that I would like to discuss about all the things that are happening here, but it sounds to me like if I'm hearing correctly, that the wish is we would vote on that, and there's kind of almost an understanding that that one won't pass, so that we move on to the second one.
Mhm.
So that we move down into Roman numeral 3. Otherwise, yes, I have things I would like to say. But I understand what Trustee Ellens is saying, and don't want to lose the opportunity to speak to this.
Yeah.
You are correct, and I don't believe we're gonna have a vote on the motion until we all think all of the trustees have had an opportunity to speak about the guidelines, if that's helpful. Because we're still not on the motion itself for the entire guidelines. We're still considering amendments to it.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is either you're welcome to speak now about this particular amendment, or there's still opportunity to speak on
Okay.
other parts of it.
So to this particular amendment, that is the letter G, that adds
Mhm.
the wording of
Mhm.
Trustee Teich. I'm not going to speak about that right now, but reserve the right later. to
Absolutely,
Come back.
absolutely. Trustee Wagner?
May I ask respectfully that we table Trustee Teich's motion while we continue to have discussion about the rest of the document, and then come back to it after we've had discussion about the full document?
We cannot do that because there's a motion on the floor with a second. We've had discussion, and we either need to recognize other trustees for
Well,
discussion, or we need to vote up or down
We also
on
have the
amendment.
option for the trustee to withdraw her motion for the moment as well, correct? No? 'Cause it's
The
been
presiding
seconded?
officer, if the trustee is inclined to do that, the presiding officer can permit that with unanimous consent of the board, which just means he asks that it be done, and if no one objects, you can move on to the next possible amendment.
So Trustee Tice with,
I'm all in favor of making this easier, so I'll withdraw the motion.
There you go.
so with unanimous consent, we will withdraw that motion. We recognize that we withdraw that motion. And now the floor is open for discussion, and Trustee Matthias.
I'm
Yes.
happy to restate a possible motion by Trustee Teich.
Well,
What
that
I'm-
would be your motion now, because Trustee Tice is.
Okay, either way. Okay. So,
We can talk about the entire document, but when the presiding officer recognizes a trustee who makes a motion for an amendment, am I not obligated to ask for a second on that amendment to then have a discussion on it before we get to the discussion of the entire document?
Well, technically, you won't ask for a second, you'll see if there is one.
Right.
So the question now is there a motion to amend or not?
So I'd recognize Trustee Matthias of whether or not there was a motion to amend the document.
if the president is asking for motions to amend, I do have a motion to amend if indeed the president does not want to go into conversation first on the motion that's on the table.
So why don't we do this?
There's-
If individual trustees want to talk about the document, let's have that discussion, and then we'll consider amendments, because we'll be here till whenever we need to be here. So why don't I recognize trustees that want to have discussions about the document itself? And I know Trustee Ashe, you had some comments about the document.
So yes and no, because it relates to kind of the overall discussion that's already being had as it
Mhm.
pertains to Roman numeral 3. And my memory serves, as Trustee Ellens referenced, that as we talked about Roman numeral 3, there was a reason why we had the wording there that we had with the two bullets underneath it, because those two defined that third one. that defined that third Roman numeral. There was a reason why we dropped the neighborhood schools and the socioeconomic diversity, as it stood as a way to define what that number 3 meant. And so I hesitate to, because I remember actually having the discussion to take A to number 3, and how after lengthy discussions during board retreat, we were discussing it and saw the benefit to it being written as it's written now. So that's the question that I have is, or the comment that I have is, I do feel like we have talked about this before, and that we set it up in the way that we set it up based on those discussions. So I think we all at the time were expressing our desire to make sure that socioeconomic diversity, that the things that we knew we wanted to have up there as pieces of information that we wanted to be highly considered through this process were valued in that way. And we were talking about the fact that I don't remember the exact percentage being somewhere in the 80s of our families that choose to go to the school where they are attendance zone bound, if you will, for lack of a better term. And that in a desire to honor that in what we had heard from our communities, and yet still push forward with the discussion on socioeconomic diversity, we chose to put that as a definer underneath that Roman numeral. So to come back again right now to change that again at the last second, I'm not sure makes sense to me, as we had a lengthy discussion about it for several months.
Sorry. Any other discussion, Trustee Wagner? And then Trustee Letitia Anderson.
I'm very much in agreement with Trustee Ashe's assessment of how Section 3 is structured. I think I'm comfortable with continuing to massage the language based on what we just talked about on 3A, but I'm not comfortable with transposing Roman numeral 3 and 3A with one another. I think to Trustee Ashe's point, there is very much a reason why that is the header, and I would be very much in favor of keeping it that way. The one that I did want to touch on as well, and this to me is truly an equity issue, and that is under 4B, the mitigate projected increase in transportation costs. While I understand that as transportation costs are something we need to be mindful of, my concern is that if we start to pull options off the table that could potentially demand more transportation, that the students that we will hurt the most are the students that have the most challenges in being able to get themselves to a program of choice, or to an academy, or to, any kind of program that would better serve their academic needs or wishes. So, because as I start to think about this, and back to my earlier statement about how very economically and racially segregated our city is, and that really is the foundational piece behind why our schools are so very economically and racially segregated, that unless we are in a position where we want to get down to hard data points and start physically moving kids tens of miles away to make those things balance, that to me I think is a recipe that's not going to make anybody happy. Instead, I would really like to see us explore more creative programming that starts to more organically bring choice to students, that makes students want to be in locations, that starts to bring diversity through in a way that it becomes a carrot rather than a stick. But a big piece of that to me is transportation, because if we want our kids that are coming from our poorest of neighborhoods, whose parents may be working, shift work or odd hours, or not have reliable, car transportation to get them across town to get to school, if we take away that school bus and getting them there, then we don't empower those students to have that same opportunity.
Thank you, Trustee Wagner. Trustee Anderson?
I'm a little saddened at what I hear. when you talk of crosstown busing, that is extremely disturbing to me. I don't know if you remember or not, or if you was in Austin or not. We've experienced that in my part of town, and that's not looked upon really well. I don't want to bus any child for any length of period of time from East Austin to, where it seems like they're on the bus for, umpteen hours. That's not. I won't support nothing like that. I just won't. But through this whole process, I have yet to hear, okay, so say we integrate the schools. How are we going to address the institutional racism? It is no fun walking into a school that you're not familiar with the community to only feel like somehow that staff don't want you there. I've experienced that. And I don't want a child or a parent to go through that. So through this whole process, that's the one piece missing for me. I want to see that. I don't want a child to go to a school outside of District 1, District 2, or whatever district to only be made to feel like they don't belong there, or we don't want those kids at our school, because I hear that too often. But sadly, those kids that you don't want at those schools sometimes perform better than your child. So that's the piece I'm looking to hear. But far as crosstown busing, that's a no-go for me. I've experienced that myself. It's a no-go. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Anderson. Trustee Matthias.
And what I'm hearing, simply to echo maybe the sentiment here, is I'm not hearing any discussion of busing across town. The words that I've heard on the dais are busing across town or tens of miles away. I'm not hearing any will on the dais for anything like that. I'm simply hearing a will of the board for administration and staff to explore possibilities for better integrating our schools and offering socioeconomically balanced schools that are more socioeconomically balanced than what this visual currently suggests.
Trustee Ellens and the Trustee Singh.
So to me, that is how we've landed where we are today. We have spent hours together trying to get to that answer, and this is the document that, in my opinion, does that. So it takes into effect what you're hearing from Trustee Anderson, what we heard from Trustee Bradley. It takes into effect what we're hearing from the Integrate Austin, and what we're hearing from the 88% of our kids who choose a proximity school. It takes into effect all of the work we're doing around academic reinvention, and so we're never at our best when we try to wordsmith on the dais, and I think I heard Dr. Cruz say this document could be amended later if we find it's not doing what we think it's supposed to be doing.
Right, when we apply the data and we start going through some scenarios, we're gonna have more information. So this isn't the end, this is just a checkpoint, but it's not the end. But it is about the guidance, as you mentioned, which way do we go, left or right? This will provide that guidance.
So with that in mind, I'm going to go back to, again, we have a document that took us 5 months to get to edit it on the dais tonight is not my preference.
Thank you, Trustee Ellens. Trustee Singh.
So this speaks to just how this guiding principles document is going to be used. Trustee Ellens mentioned that it would be kind of a gut check, which I agree with. It's something to balance the quantitative data, but I would just like a little bit more information on really how that gut check is going to be happening. How is this going to be operationalized? I know that we had talked about maybe having some sort of a rubric. by which we would test the different scenarios, like a rubric that's based on the guiding principles. Is that kind of what the thinking is? And if so, could you expand on that?
We can. I'm going to ask Matthias to come forward as we apply this one, because we do have the KPIs, and I apologize, I probably should have included the KPIs with this one. The KPIs that we actually discussed at the last work session is what we would use to apply this. It will be a quantitative review, but we're going to have to look at collectively to determine what type of impact we're going to move forward with on any one scenario. Any one of these variables will have some quantifiable data, but I don't think one is going to then supersede another item. So it's really looking at it collectively. So we really just need to start applying it. But I don't know that we've had specifically some type of Likert scale or some type of element from that that we've introduced in this process. But it is applying those KPIs. It's something that I want to make sure to just sort of bring back. While they're not noted here, those KPIs are not up for board vote. But those KPIs are the ones we've discussed in I think one retreat and maybe a work session or so. Matthias?
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Trustees, my name is Matthias Segura, Operations Officer for AISD. And it is a two-step process. The first step is more analytical. We're taking the guiding principles and the factors beneath them and developing the KPIs, or key performance indicators, that will be used to kind of measure where we are today and how we might get to getting closer to our targets, which we're going to develop with academics, human capital, as well as finance and operations. The idea is once we get to a point where we have the scenarios and they begin to develop, which will be towards the middle and late June, we'll then begin to develop the rubric that'll be less quantitative and more qualitative. That's really where that gut check comes in, right? At that point, we will have developed scenarios that meet many of the components within the guiding principles, but we know that they're executable, right? We actually have the financial wherewithal to develop and execute them over a period of time. So the idea is only the ones that are solvent kind of and can be progressed are the ones that would actually go through the second part of the analysis, which is step 2, and that's that qualitative rubric. We're going to work with y'all to develop that, not unlike how we did to get to where we are today. So we don't have them developed quite yet, but you will be a part of that process, and they will be developed before we even get to step 2.
Some of the items, even when we apply the data, the program desert piece doesn't just mean make sure we have everything everywhere. There will be new designs, new academic opportunities that we want to pursue. So it may be a programmatic desert, but it doesn't mean that everything's going to look exactly alike. Something new and different as we've done over time. And I know I had talked to Dr. Hill not to show the vertical team slide, but as we're talking, we might want to just show that one, just to show the program pieces and how they work if we still have that particular those slides. But I don't want to limit ourselves to what we have today. The analysis will be applied. We know what we have today, but the work is to make it all better.
Thank you. Yeah, because I really wanted to just make sure that this whole exercise of the guiding principles was not in vain. That it had some teeth, that it was actually going to be used. So it does make me glad. I'm satisfied knowing that there is going to be a rubric that's developed to do that qualitative, to formalize that gut check. And that's something that we would be doing together. Thank you.
So I have Trustee Cindy Anderson and then Trustee Wagner. And anyone else for now? Trustee Anderson.
I just want to make a couple of other comments. I do agree to an extent. We've had a number of these conversations, and I can honestly say I don't do my best work at almost 11 o'clock at night, and I am hesitant to provide the administration with less flexibility, because I don't think there's any one way to improve equity or enrollment or access or integrate schools. And so I want to give them as much leeway in this first stage to see what they come back with. And then I think there will be numerous additional opportunities for us to sort of have another gut check or level set as to whether or not we feel like the scenarios that are being created do sufficiently represent not just the district values, but the values and the conversations that we've had as a board. And while I do like the idea of rubrics as well, being able to help assess whether or not these scenarios are the right ones, for me, my first question on everything is going to be, how is this better for kids? And so I think the data is important, but at the same time, I think that's a question we have to continue to ask ourselves is how is this better for kids? And because at the end of the day, this is all about our kids. And it tends to get messy sometimes when we have a lot of adults in the room, very, well-intentioned, intelligent, passionate adults that want to advocate for a multitude of things, but at some point we got to decide to start with something. And I think what I heard Dr. Cruz say was that if we need to go back after you start the work as an administration and redirect as to whether or not you're meeting the values and the direction that we feel like we provided, there will be opportunities to do that. And so my preference is to not wordsmith at 11 o'clock at night after we've met 5 times on this already, but to give the administration a chance to start applying it and then to have those incremental opportunities in the future to come back and say, yes, I think you're on the right path. No, I think you're not. And again, hear much more. Because I think once we start seeing what you're talking about, it's so much easier to determine whether or not you've applied what we're telling you in the right way or in the intended way. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Trustee Wagner. And then Trustee Matthias.
Well, and I come to this tonight, I think, still a little bit confused by who the audience is for this document. It's the same question I've asked every time you sat before me, Mr. Segura. But it is when, and I think what I'm reacting to at this point is that this does appear to be a malleable process. And I think that may be by design. But what's becoming increasingly challenging for me is to understand why we're voting on a document that is likely to change when we've provided input multiple times in very public ways as to our sentiments as a board around the document. When this is supposed to serve as an internal tool for internal administration to work to make decisions and recommendations is what we were originally told. But then we start to hear changes along the way, like we suddenly have a think tank process that we're adding on, which is not something that was discussed when we met 2 weeks ago. So what this is creating is, I think it's asking the board to stand very strongly behind something, but then feeling a little bit where I'm starting to feel like I'm on a little bit of unsteady footing because things are changing so much. And so if we want this to be a malleable process and we want to have that flexibility, then I would like for us to articulate that clearly and then assert when we're going to come to that place of consensus, KPIs, clear deliberation moving forward. But right now I notice things that we still have issues like with the Southwest boundary change that's in flight, where there is, I think, still a lack of coordination between that effort and what's happening here. Things like the map being released prior to us really being able to flesh out what's happening with all of this is creating confusion in our communities as well. So it feels to me like there still is a little bit of work that we need to do in terms of how we want to talk to our community about what we're doing. And I don't necessarily think that sending out a 22-paragraph email the last week of school is going to get us there. So all of that to say is I said in the last meeting that I want to get out of the way and let you guys do the work, but I also need a little bit of clarity around what the work's going to be. And that includes what those KPIs are, how we're going to message this to our community, how we're going to realize the Southwest boundary change in a meaningful way that doesn't mean that we're speeding it up because of some arbitrary point of alignment with this vote. So those are things I would ask. And specific to that last piece, I'm very confused as to why we moved up the boundary map vote for Southwest Austin that was indicated in the 2017 FMP to coincide with this, because we're not going to be voting on any other boundary maps that I understand. We may be voting on some opportunities where boundary changes could realize options in our schools, but if we're not going to vote on maps across the board, why speed that one up from December to October and put our community in a place where public meetings are being held in the heat of summer, where parents and families are not around or as engaged and able to attend, and providing our BIC with less time to be able to do that work. So those are things, I know that's a little bit tangential to what we're talking about, but all of this kind of, for me, weaves back to the greater picture of what are we trying to accomplish and how are we getting it done?
Thank you, Trustee Wagner. Trustee Matthias?
When the president is ready to entertain a motion, I'm happy to make a motion for an amendment.
Okay. Let me just ask one more time if there are any other comments from trustees before we start. Trustee Matthias?
So what I would like to move is the amendment of number 3 in line with our previous conversation, such that number 3 would read, optimize opportunities for socioeconomic diversity and promote socioeconomically balanced schools while balancing proximity from home to school. To be clear then, we would be adding the words and promote socioeconomically balanced schools between the words diversity and while. We would be deleting the words to neighborhood schools, and we'd be adding the words from home to school. Letter A under 3 then would be maintain assigned school concept and other school choices, which is currently number 3.
So just for clarity, both of those you want to put in one motion?
I'm happy to put them in one motion unless the president would like for me to do otherwise.
I think we can entertain two separate motions. Okay. It's your choice to do
I'm
one or two.
happy to test the water and I mean, I would like to think that the trustees on this dais support the idea of socioeconomic diversity and socioeconomic balanced schools, so I'm happy to test the waters to see whether this trustee is correct in that respect.
Okay, so can you restate your motion to amend the motion?
Sure. The motion to amend, so number 3 would now read, 3, optimize opportunities for socioeconomic diversity and promote socioeconomically balanced schools while balancing proximity from home to school. 3A, maintain assigned school concept and other choice options. 3B, consider road patterns, travel duration, proximity, and start-stop times to increase number of students with reasonable access to an elementary school, such that the only changes are the reversal of 3 and 3A, with the addition of the words and promote socioeconomically balanced schools, and the placement of the word from home to school in the place of to neighborhood schools.
So there's a motion to amend the motion. Is there a second to that?
Second.
I'm sorry, who seconded? Trustee Tice? Sorry. Trustee Tice. So any discussion on the amendment to the motion? Trustee Ashe, and then Trustee Singh, and then Trustee Matthias.
So I just want to reiterate what I said earlier, that I guess maybe what I really want, the other piece that I want to say is I support not maintaining what we already have, as we have worked on it for five months, and we've already had these discussions, and I support socioeconomic diversity in our schools as I feel like it's represented as it's written. So, because I was concerned that there might be a perception that if I did not support that, then that would mean that I don't support socioeconomic diversity, which I don't find to be true, because it's still in the document as you define what Roman numeral 3 is with those 2 subsets. So I still believe that we are providing a direction to the district, and that says that that is an important value for us, and support keeping it as it is written.
Thank you, Trustee Ashe. Trustee Singh?
So I will be supporting this motion with the caveat that I think what Trustee Anderson said earlier was really important, that as you guys are creating your scenarios, please don't put crosstown busing in there. You know, that's not what we're talking about. I don't think that's not how I interpret this at all. I would like to see any changes be more compelling and by choice, and by parent and family choice. However, I agree, we have talked about this a lot in our board retreats. However, I really like the fact that we are voting on this because I think it's a really democratic process. There are some points, we talked about these, but we never voted on them. And I think that's kind of the whole point maybe of voting on it, is to make sure that all voices are heard. So that's all I just wanted to say on that point. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Singh. Trustee Matthias?
I just want to thank the board in advance for its support of this motion. So as our speakers are saying during public comment, there are studies that suggest the benefits of us helping to close this gap that we're seeing in the data as they currently exist. It's almost as if you could turn this map on its side, with West Austin schools being on one side and East Austin schools being on the other. So if this motion were to fail, then my question for this board would be, how are we going to bring more resources to these historically under-resourced schools? And that will be a far more expensive proposition. I'm hoping that we can find a way to be able to deal with this by having staff go off and come back suggesting to us how to bring a better socioeconomic balance to our schools. I would like to say too, I know that we've been massaging this for quite some time at a number of meetings, but I'm grateful that this is the first time that we're voting on this text. You know, if I had it my way, I'd want to put that line back at the top that the Austin ISD will have fabulous schools inside and out. For me, that captures it. But this is part of the iterative process that is this. I'm glad that we finally have a vote this evening where we can all express our support for what is coming together, even on the dais this evening.
Thank you, Trustee Matthias. Trustee Cindy Anderson?
So I just use the magic of the Google to help me make one last point. For the record, optimize and optimize opportunities means advance, correct, enhance, improve, increase, progress. And so I feel like the intent is already in there. And I, again, really struggle with especially the complexity of the multiple amendments at this hour and whether or not that is our best work. And so I will not be voting to support it, but not because I don't believe that that is a key priority, but because I believe it's already in there. And I think wordsmithing at this late stage is not the most productive way to move forward.
Thank you, trustees. Any other comments on the motion to amend the motion? If there is none, Trustee Matthias made a motion to amend the document, and Trustee Teish seconded the motion. If anyone needs to have it restated, please.
It's a good idea.
So, yeah, if you wouldn't mind restating the motion, and then we'll vote for it.
Sure. The amended language of number 3 would read as followed. 3, optimize opportunities for socioeconomic diversity and promote socioeconomically balanced schools while balancing proximity from home to school. 3A, maintain assigned school concept and other school options. 3B, consider road patterns, travel duration, proximity, and start-stop times to increase the number of students with reasonable access to an elementary school. Did I misread that? And other choice options, I'm hearing 3A. 3A would now read maintain assigned school concept and other choice options.
Okay.
Thank you.
So now that we have the amendment, the motion to amend the motion, all those in favor of the amendment to amend the motion to amend the amendment, which
motion to amend the motion.
to amend the motion as stated by Trustee Matthias and seconded by Trustee Teish, please raise your right hand for it. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the motion fails 4 yes, 5 no.
I believe Trustee Singh has a motion.
So Trustee Singh.
Okay, so I have a motion to go under Roman numeral 1. And I think right now I would like it to read, I would like to add a bullet that states, ensure all students have easy access to a high-quality and rigorous core academic curriculum. And I add this because by putting the statement in the document, we are explicitly communicating that high academic achievement is truly our priority. Right now, it's implicit in this document, but I feel like it's important enough that we need to make it explicit.
So is
And-
there, I'm sorry.
And I'll read it again. Ensure all students have easy access to a high-quality and a rigorous core academic curriculum.
Ensure all students have easy access to a,
High-quality and rigorous core academic curriculum.
so is there a second to Trustee Singh's motion?
Second.
So Trustee Anderson seconds the motion, and so any discussion on the motion to amend the guiding principles document? Yes, Trustee Ellens.
This was something that I also agreed to during the work session, but the administration came back, and it's not too different from the last one, made it sound as if it's already in here. And I've heard Dr. Cruz say that is your number one initiative every year. So can you speak to that a little bit?
So, I think it was in the actual guiding principle about, there's different wording in there. I think that, so guiding principle 1 is about equitable access to programmatic opportunities. That is around core academics and making sure that we are providing that rigorous core instruction for all students. And we put in there just a little sort of qualify in there that makes sure that it engages and inspires students. So it's one thing to offer it, and I'm just describing here, I'm not in connection to what Trustee Singh's motion is, but we said we're going to provide it, but the connector or the quality indicator is that it engages and inspires students. So that sort of gives a value about that actual curriculum. So I think where we talked about equitable access, there's some keywords in here that are different, but nonetheless, you asked me to explain what was in this one. That's where we saw that as far as a strong academic program, a strong academic curriculum was in guiding principle 1.
So just to restate, what Trustee Singh has proposed is specific words around easy access, which you see as equitable access, perhaps. High quality and rigorous, you're seeing coming out in the words engage and inspire. And then the difference between programmatic opportunities and core curriculum, that's the last piece. I'm not sure I see it captured, but it's more important, it's internal document. So do you see it captured?
I think it also may be explaining it. So the motion passes or fails is also trying to make sure that we get the intent. I think that's what we're also getting from the conversation. It was more of with Trustee Singh, but what you just said is about making it more explicit. Let's not take it for granted. Let's make sure that it's front and center. And every year under the superintendent's priorities, that's been action item 1, a strong academic rigorous curriculum. If we don't have that, we can have a lot of shiny objects, which you were talking about earlier, and it doesn't matter. It has to be a strong, rigorous curriculum for every single student walking through our classroom doors. And so I think it's sort of in the language in here. So I think I'm still getting the intent that making sure that it's strong core instruction, and by strong, I in my head I think of rigorous instruction for all students. This helps to sort of contextualize it a little bit more.
So are you saying it would actually be helpful to have this language in the document?
Well, what I'm saying is it helps me understand, it contextualizes what that means. I understand what Trustee Singh is saying.
So you say it without you now contextualize it without changing the document.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So may I respond?
Sure.
Okay,
Proceed.
so I appreciate your taking the time to explain that. I think one nuance that might be different in my statement versus your understanding is that core curriculum is a defined curriculum. It's something that it's a defined curriculum. It's not just saying, yes, we're going to offer something rigorous, because I know we do that. But we don't have any way of really knowing how one school's offerings are different from another, and if there's like a minimum core curriculum that's expected that a child. So 'cause parents may not be able to research all this on their own, but they should be comfortable that at any school they go to, their child will get access to something. They should know what that is.
Oh, absolutely. So is that something about ensuring equitable access to a rigorous core curriculum and programmatic opportunities that engage?
That could work.
Because I just put in, of course, you want to get the rigorous core academic program.
Yes, I'd be happy with that.
Okay, I'm not a voting member or anything, but
I
I
know,
just.
but
I'm just trying
I'd
to
be
get the
happy with that,
intent, so
because
I don't
that
wanna-
actually
I don't want Todd to come and tell me
elevates it.
that
No, that actually
I'm trying to
know.
internalize it, but
But
I'm in
yes.
agreement with you, I am.
Yeah,
Because without that, it's.
correct, because I don't think we really have the word academic in here. And so that's why I wanted to make it explicit. Okay.
So equal access to a
So,
rigorous
so
core
trustees,
curriculum.
saying without objection from the trustees, would you mind restating the wording that you just agreed to?
Sure. I said, ensure all students have easy access to a high quality and rigorous core academic curriculum. That's what I had stated. However, Dr. Cruz, even as a non-voting member, came up with some wonderful language, and I would love for you to repeat what you told me.
So ensure, guiding principle 1, ensure equitable access to a rigorous core curriculum and programmatic opportunities. So I'm just inserting a rigorous core curriculum.
I like that better.
Yes. Mhm.
So is that your without objection from the trustees, is that your motion now?
Yes.
Trustee Singh?
Yes, what Dr. Cruz just said.
Okay. So if I can just restate it, it's, you want to change guiding principle 1 to say ensure equitable access to rigorous,
To a rigorous.
core
Core
academic curriculum?
Yeah,
Cor- Core academic curriculum.
Yes.
And programmatic opportunities that engage and inspire all students.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, so Letitia Anderson, are you fine with that? Okay, so without objection from the board, we have a motion and a second to change guiding principle 1 to ensure equitable access to a rigorous core academic curriculum and programmatic opportunities that engage and inspire all students. Unless there's any other comment, I'm going to call the vote. Yes, Trustee Mathias.
I will be happy to support this amendment. My only concern is that when we start using words like rigorous, that those could be subjective, that two persons could look at the same thing and one could call it rigorous and one could question whether it's rigorous. So I think a lot of the words that we use in this document are opening that door, but I don't know how to solve that unless administration and staff has some solution for that. I mean, it just seems that
No, it
that
is. We'd
there's
have.
no,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, please.
No, we would. We have to operationalize the terms. One way to operationalize them is in the actual KPIs. So the KPIs will roll up to identifying each one of the factors under the guiding principle. But you are correct. We are applying what we believe under KPIs will get us to some type of quantitative data points. Then talk about a rigorous curriculum. As an example, college readiness, dual credit, early college, high school, AP, pre-AP would be just when I think of rigorous. For a high school, I look at some of those elements in there. Core curriculum means that we have to teach to a standard. But you are correct. We are instituting our judgment call on how we're going to operationalize it. And that is going to run throughout the entire document.
Trustee Wagner?
Well, I Just wanted to make the point of, given the intent of the document and what it's intended to do in driving how we're looking at campus utilization and programmatic assignment throughout the district, I just want to make sure we're not trying to force fit too much into this document, because I think we have other opportunities that we do that. We have a strategic scorecard that includes things like advanced academics. There are other drivers that we have for things that are so intrinsic to the work of the district like that. So I just offer that before we get too bogged down in the language of is the addition of that language. Sorry, I was just waiting for all the side conversations to stop before I went forward. No, I was just going to offer is the addition of that language going to suddenly change the business of the district? And I don't think it does. I think measures like the strategic scorecard, where we look at advanced academics, do that much more effectively than trying to put it here in language that could be ambiguous or not as weighty as it is in other areas. So just offering that before we spend a lot of time wordsmithing every detail of it and making sure that we get it exactly the way we want it, because I think it could take us a while to get that particular piece there when it's something that we're already doing in other places.
So before, Trustee Tice, did you have a comment or, before I call for the vote, I just want a point of clarification from Mr. Clark. So this will be the second amendment to the motion. So does that mean that that's the limit of 2, or can we continue to?
We only have 2 amendments to the under one main motion. Fortunately, you can have unlimited amendments through the course of approving the main motion. So now you're just looking at one amendment.
Thank you for that clarification. So we have a motion. Yes, Trustee? Okay, so we have a motion to edit the first guiding principle, and we have a second for that from Trustee Anderson, and a motion from Trustee Singh, and a second from Trustee Letitia Anderson. So all those in favor? Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I have one more thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. I just, I'm in support of this concept, but I hear Trustee Wagner, and it goes back to the other item that we just had. I'm hesitant to change any of the document tonight, so if I don't support it, it's not that I don't support that issue. It's that I understand, you understand, we think it's important. Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion from Trustee Singh and a second from Trustee Letitia Anderson to edit. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
I think it would maybe a conversation for the officers might be how we avoid this in the future. That is, say, as trustees, we expect to be amending a document that we've not had any chance to vote on in any way. And so I don't know if there's a more perfect way to do this. I understand it's 11:20 at night, but I also understand the desire of trustees to take a document that we've not had a chance, apart from just commenting on and not being able to vote on various elements of it. So I'm happy for us to be here as long as we need to be able to amend it according to the will of the board. I just want to say as well, while we are on this point about rigorous, and I don't know if for instance, there might be some sort of glossary or something so that we can help, so that can be generally understood when we say, rigorous this or equitable that there's some understanding of what it is that looks like and how it is that it might be measured. It's not a part of this vote. I'm just throwing it out there since we have various words that remain unclear to this trustee.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Trustee Singh and a second by Trustee Letitia Anderson. All those in favor of making the change to the guiding principle 1, please raise your right hand. 2, 3, 4. Okay. All those voting against it? So the motion the motion fails. 4 for it, 5 against. Okay. So, any other Trustee Tice?
I know it's late, but I'm going to give it one more shot at making sure that we have some clear guidelines for equity. I'm going to make, and I assume from what Mr. Clark said, I can make another amendment, and that would be under Roman numeral 2, adding in H, and that would be to cap the percentage of economically disadvantaged students experiencing schools consolidation to no more than 53%. And I think that that would be equitable.
Can you read that one more time?
So I am making a motion to add under Roman numeral 2, letter H, to cap the percentage of economically disadvantaged students experiencing school consolidation to no more than 53%.
Okay. So is there a second?
Happy to second.
Okay, so trustee Tice, trustee Matthias seconds that. Any discussion? Trustee Wagner?
I swear I'm not picking on you. I'm really not. But this one I think is a bit hard for me to swallow because, again, as we look at severe under-enrollment, we look at density of schools within particular neighborhoods. It really does center around a couple of core neighborhoods of Austin, and that is a really unfortunate reality. And it's not that I come to this work wanting to start just shuttering schools in those neighborhoods, but instead, what I am concerned about is if we start to place caps or limits, are we shuttering opportunities where we could take students who are in a severely under-enrolled school that don't have access to the quality of facility or the robustness of programming because there isn't the critical mass of students within that building, and potentially be able to offer a solution in a consolidated building that allows for more students to be present, more instructional staff and cohorts to be present, more programming to be present, more support services to be present, and be in a high-quality, well-functioning facility at the same time. Is that a better alternative than not addressing a campus because we've already looked at improving too many communities? And I know that's a very charged comment to make, but I also want to be sure that we aren't leaving communities untouched simply because we don't want to disrupt more than we have to, and rather than being able to realize every opportunity that we have available to us to provide for those communities in a way that they haven't had in the past. And Trustee Anderson, I see your hand up, and I very much welcome your comments on this, and I don't intend to speak on behalf of those communities, but only to think in terms of not just what is past history and what's happened today, but also to think about how we can best serve these communities and the entire city of Austin into the future as well. Very much in the spirit of wanting to have every student leaving this process with more, rather than leaving particular campus communities in a situation where they continue to persist with the same historic level of underservice that they have had in the past.
Thank you, Trustee Letitia Anderson.
To talk about speechless. So many things I want to say, but I just, you know, you pointed out, you didn't mention by name, but, you know, us trustees down here know the areas you are referring to. But let's be clear. As far as I know, there has never been a discussion to even halfway talk about. There's been a discussion, but not a thorough discussion to address District 1, District 2. Let's just put it out there. And if you really want the best, really want it, then why fight against capping diversity or capping a certain number of students? What Ann brought forward, why fight against that? You talk about not wanting to seem one way, but when I go out there and I talk to my constituents, they see it totally different when you deliver messages up here. And I would really encourage you to reach out to some folks in my area, and I can put you in contact with them. How they take your messaging is that you're just really gung-ho, let's close D1 schools, and I'm gonna fight tooth and nail to prevent that. I am going to fight tooth and nail. That's part of the reason why I ran to be on this board. You know, it's sad. It is so sad. You know, I applaud the administration for what they're trying to do, but when we look at things from our view, even historically, and it's like, no, well, it's too late, we don't want to change it. I get that. But we're concerned about our areas too, just as passionate as you are about your area. So I'm not going to take offense. I'm not, but all right, I'm done.
Thank you, Trustee Anderson. Trustee Matthias?
I will be supporting this amendment. I think this amendment is absolutely inspired. To whomever had the thought of this amendment, I just want to sing the praises of this amendment. As a district, we say that equity is a district value. Every month when we gather, we read that one of our values is equity, diversity, and inclusion. If this board is serious about equity being a value, then I'm happy to see the board vote in favor of this motion. We are down some 6,500 students in the 7 years that some of us have been on this board. There's no doubt in my mind we need to close schools. The question becomes, how do we close them in a way that does not disproportionately affect low socioeconomic, low ECODIS students, that it doesn't disproportionately affect students of color, that it doesn't disproportionately affect black and brown students in this city. And so, I will be supporting this, and I thank trustees in advance for their support of this amendment. If this amendment fails, then let's charge the officers with having a conversation on how we can strike the word equity from our values as a district. It's no use having an espoused theory if it's not going to be a theory in action.
Trustee Ellens, and then Trustee Anderson.
So how would you operationalize this?
The same question
I guess I'm asking those who have made the motion.
Well, can I just add to what you were just saying? I was going to ask the administration or Dr. Cruz the impact of if our school district has 55% economically disadvantaged, or is it 53%? And we're distributing, because obviously this is about capping and distributing. So if we distribute those kids, what kind of impact does that have on the operations of the school district? Or what could potentially, I think, is that your Trustee Ellens, is that what you're asking as well? Or were you asking that of the trustees?
I think she's asking for the trustees.
Can I ask it in a different way?
Sure.
I'm not, that's not how I'm reading the motion. So I'm happy to hear that answer, but the motion, as I'm hearing it, but perhaps I'm wrong, is that it's not, what we heard originally from the group was no school could be over that 53% cap. But what this motion says is that cap the percentage of economically disadvantaged students experiencing school consolidation to no more than 53%. So what does that look? I don't know how you operationalize that. What would that look like?
Trustee Matthias, you have a comment about that?
Sure.
No?
I'm just going to throw this out there for us to massage. But if we're looking at closing 2 schools, we can take a look at the total population of those 2 schools and easily see what is the percent of socioeconomically disadvantaged students in those 2 schools. And if that number at the end of the day does not exceed 53% of socioeconomically disadvantaged students, then we can look at the possible consolidation of those 2 schools. To look at consolidating a school with 98% socioeconomic disadvantaged students is impacting socioeconomically disadvantaged students and their families in a way that is not tolerable to some of us on this dais.
So it's the schools that would be consolidated together, the final product would not be more than 53%?
That's what I'm hearing in the amendment. That students experiencing schools consolidations would not amount to more than 53% of the students who are affected by those consolidations.
And just to follow up, so next year when our socioeconomic number is 51%, I mean, does this change?
Excellent question for those who made the motion.
Trustee Anderson.
A couple of questions as to sort of what this would look like. So if I understand the example you just gave, Trustee Matthias, and to pick an example of 2 schools in Trustee Letitia Anderson's district, District 1, where you have the students at Norman and Sims co-locating at Sims, waiting on the completion of the modernization project at Norman. Because they are both Title I schools, are you saying that the students at Sims should not be allowed to move into the modernized Norman facility? And knowing the numbers of students we have and the number of students we're building that campus for, or that we're building the modernized project for, what would be your expectation in that example?
Trustee Teish made the motion.
I could not give you an example. I'm sorry.
Because the way maybe it's just the late hour, or the fact that I was a liberal arts major for a reason and not a mathematician or a statistician, but the way I heard Trustee Matthias's explanation was that if any 2 campuses involved in a consolidation conversation exceeded 53% of students being impacted, we would not do that if this was approved. And I guess I would just also suggest that we have to remember sort of where we're starting from as well, because we have 79 Title I schools. We have another probably 24 minimum that are above 53%. So that essentially takes a whole lot of stuff off the table before we even get started. And that doesn't mean I don't believe in equity or integration, but either we're gonna provide the administration with a starting point and not cross a whole bunch of stuff off the list to begin with. Because again, knowing we can come back and say, that is not all what we intended. But I feel like for me, that motion would make so many things impossible. And I have a really hard time saying the students at Sims can't attend that beautiful new facility at Norman, especially with the number of the combined populations. I have a real problem with that. And not to pick on District 1, and that yes, we still need to limit how many different districts and communities are impacted as a whole, absolutely. But I don't want to prevent students from having opportunities either. And for me, I'm very concerned how this looks in application does the opposite of, I think, what we're trying to accomplish.
Trustee Singh and then Trustee Matthias.
Okay, so the way I interpreted that amendment, Trustee Matthias, was a little different from how you interpreted it. Okay. So let's see if maybe we can get this. I interpret that amendment as saying out of all the students, at the end of the day, of all the students who have to face school closures, only 53% of those students should be socioeconomically disadvantaged. which is quite different from what you said. So let's say, like,
It's consolidation.
or consolidation, or, you know, well, yeah, or that phase consolidation. So if you think about, let's say at the end of the day, we end up consolidating schools, and I'm just making this number up, okay? This is nothing I have heard. I'm literally pulling this number out of the sky. Well, I'll just use a fake number. Let's say that, let's say at the end of the day, we consolidated schools that resulted, you know, for 1 million students, okay? Which is never gonna happen, but 1 million students. 53% of that million, and no more than 53% of that million, should be low SES students. That's the way I interpret it. So is that, Trustee Teich, is that how you interpret it? Trustee Matthias?
I'm happy to speak after.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that, yeah, so that's how I would interpret it.
Okay, Trustee Matthias and then Trustee.
And so for me, and I apologize that I'm not so eloquent at this hour, but it's in the aggregate. The number that I've used before is that if the Austin ISD were to achieve the same efficiencies as the Cy-Fair ISD, and I'm not advocating that we do, but if the Austin ISD were to operate as efficiently as the Cy-Fair ISD, we would close 37 schools today. I'm not advocating that we close 37 schools, but I'm also not advocating, I'm imagining there's going to be more than 2 schools that we need to close, which is why we need to be thinking in terms of the aggregate, which is also why I was suggesting in previous meetings, and it didn't make it into this document yet, but that we hold the administration accountable for the number of schools that we as a board expect to have in this district 10 years from now. Because what I heard at this very meeting was the superintendent telling us we're bringing this school online and we're bringing this school online. Our enrollment is going down. We don't need more schools. We need less schools, and as a board, we need to be telling the superintendent, is less schools mean going from 130 to 128, or to 120, or to 110, or to 97?
Trustee N? Yeah, Trustee Wagner, sorry.
Sorry. One thing I think I'm having trouble wrapping my head around, though, is when we talk about school consolidations, we're talking about communities of campuses that are severely under-enrolled. That would be candidates to combine 2 schools together. Can someone share with me an example of how we would go into a non-Title I community and consolidate schools in non-Title I communities? Because as I'm thinking about like the patterns of enrollment, if I'm going into Northwest Austin, all of our schools are bursting at the seams. If I'm going into Southwest Austin, all of our schools are bursting at the seams. So consolidation doesn't really become an option as we start to move into our communities that have lower and lower levels of low SES kids. And so consolidation is a particular tactic that comes into play in communities that have severe under-enrollment. So it's not, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how the math works, and how we get there. And that's something it's a genuine question, because I think you guys must be seeing something that I'm not, and so I'm asking, please explain to me if I'm missing something in that process, but I'm having a hard time understanding that.
I'm happy to respond. What I'm seeing is a possible disproportionate impact on Black and brown students and their families, on poor students and their families. And so I think that this amendment is inspired insofar as it helps us as a board and as administration, as a district, to think about those students and their families who are being impacted. You're exactly right. It's Title I schools that are being impacted by possible school consolidations according to the present scenario.
This isn't about me wanting to heap an unnecessary burden on those schools, but it's also an unfortunate reality of our district right now when we look at patterns of outmigration, we look at where families are going, and this is where I keep coming back to the carrot and the stick. We have more schools than we can support right now, operationally, financially. Something's got to give, but how, and I'm looking to my fellow board members to say if the way that we can't give is by consolidating our under-enrolled schools, then how do we get there? is my question. Is it that we managed to shift everybody from a Southwest Austin school to an East Austin school and then close the Southwest Austin school? Is that, I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand how do we realize that in a way that doesn't impact?
Trustee Anderson.
So here's my thought, and this is all I'm gonna say. Dr. Cruz is looking for direction. Here's my direction. All means all. It don't mean District 1, it don't mean District 2, it means all. And to single out District 1 or District 2 to protect Southwest Austin is a slap in the face to the people that we represent. It is my understanding there is a school that is a little under-enrolled in Southwest Austin. So it really, Dr. Cruz, my direction, here's my direction, period. All means all. It don't mean District 1 or District 1, District 2, protect Southwest Austin, protect Far West. All means all. If District 1, District 2 families have to experience closure, consolidation, boundary change, so should Southwest Austin, so should Far West. They need to experience that too. It shouldn't be students and families in District 1 having the hardships of being moved or being bused. All means all. Thank you.
So, trustees, any other comments? Trustee Singh and then Trustee Ashe.
So the purpose of, if we were really just going to look at enrollment numbers, we would be done with this process by now. The whole point of going through these guiding principles and the think tanks and the Kpis and everything else is so that we would not put an undue burden on our Black and brown kids and our low-income kids. And I think what Trustee Mathias is attempting to do with his motion here is to actually hold us accountable to that. Do you feel like that's a correct assessment? Oh, I'm sorry, it was Trustee Tyke. Sorry, I'm so used to looking at you. Sorry, Trustee Tyke. And do you agree with that assessment? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, so I'm supportive of the gist of this. I do feel like we want to have a cap, but I'm going to offer an amendment to Trustee Tyke's amendment, which is I think it's a bit premature to actually put a percentage, but I do want to have a percentage eventually. And I think I would like for the equity officer that we eventually hire to help us sort that out. And so that's my concern is I would really like to actually see some of the scenarios and maybe the motion I might make, the amendment to Trustee Tyke's motion would be cap the percentage of economically disadvantaged students experiencing school closures after more information has been received and the equity officer has been hired. And the information I'm referring to is the stuff that we learned that comes out of the think tanks, the first round of scenarios. Let's get a feel for this, but let's have it in there, but just not identify that percentage quite yet for some of the reasons that I have just mentioned. Also, you know, we still don't have the legislative, there are just some things that I am waiting to hear from before I feel like I can really put a percentage on this. So that's where I am on that one.
So trustees, I'm sorry, Trustee Ashe.
So I really think, and I have certainly heard from the trustees of the areas, particularly from Trustee Anderson and Trustee Mathias, that this is something that we need to hold at the forefront of our minds. And I will kind of jump on something you just said, Trustee Singh, and say that I feel like we may be future tripping a little bit here until we get the scenarios, until we have the information in front of us. And I know that as I begin to see these scenarios, that 53% number is going to be floating around in my head. And it's going to be there as I look at, because if I remember correctly, even in October, when we have school closures that do come to this board, we will be voting on that. Am I correct in that?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning we will once again have the decision in front of us with numbers, with all of that we can examine at that time. And I kind of go back again, and I would imagine that there are people who are tired of hearing me say this, but and I'm going to say it anyway, which is I remember the uncertainty and the fear around the scenarios that we had with the facility master plan and what that was going to look like until we saw it in action, until we started to see the scenarios come forward with the data behind it. And once we saw it and then could navigate through it, and we're all better informed by what these and what is eventually now going to be key performance indicators, then we were able to come back and look at it and say, oh my gosh, 79% of the people being impacted by this are socioeconomically disadvantaged students. I remember that meeting in May where we talked about that, and I think that that's something that we need to bring forward. So I am not comfortable attaching a percentage to this, and I'm not comfortable, again, as I've stated before, altering this document tonight, as I feel like wordsmithing at the 11th hour I struggle with. However, I know that for me personally, that is something that, as I look at the things that are listed in here for socioeconomic diversity, for considering all of our students, all of our 80,000 students, considering our socioeconomically disadvantaged students, our students of color, all of that's going to be floating in my mind as we move forward through this process, as it has been shown to be a community value that we want to move forward with. So that I've just wanted to bring that forward as something for us to think about as well.
Thank you, Trustee Ashe. Any other comments before Trustee Letitia Anderson?
So since there is so much pushback about any little change in this document, when will the equity officer be coming online?
Dr. Cruz.
We hope to hire that position in the June board meeting. And so then it depends on after that time. So we're hoping by August to have the individual on board hired in June. Then there's a negotiation of when they can actually start.
So, trustees, any other comments before I come back to Trustee Trustee Anderson, Cindy Anderson?
I think if we need to make that addition, I appreciate Trustee Singh's suggestion of a compromise such that if we ultimately arrive at 65% or 57%, I wouldn't want to not see that as substantial progress, and not be able to have the opportunity to evaluate once we look at what the options are, having that more definitive information that doesn't automatically take a whole lot of things off the table, that gives us the most flexibility, that I feel like there's still an opportunity for us to get to a point. But again, I just would like to encourage us to remember where we started from, and that there can still be substantial progress made. And I don't know what the end result's going to be. I don't know what the right number is going to be. But just from a pure basic math scenario, I feel like starting out with something today would severely inhibit the creativity and the opportunities that we're really striving to find the best possible outcomes for our kids. And I know my intent is that all does mean all. I need to see where we're going to see the best way to get there.
Dr. Cruz, you had a comment?
I did. I just wanted to, obviously school consolidations, repurposing, those are very significant issues, and that's what the board has been discussing. I wanted to perhaps show another dimension of impact. And so this is, it's all critical and important, but this is more so with guiding principle 1. These were our programs that we had in place back in 2010 to 2011. So you can see the items that we're just getting, that we really support now, but are really just launching at that time. If I fast forward to what do we have today, so I look at the impact. This is the programmatic impact. I don't know if it's helpful or not, but because it's come up a few times, how about we look at it and operationalize it? What does it actually look like? Well, we made a very intentional effort here, and we actually heard PPFT, and in that document talked about REACH. We were very intentional on the program pieces. So items, guiding principle 1 and 2, specifically then talked about the program elements, what was actually brought into place at these particular schools to support our students and to support student learning. I just wanted to show another dimension, because yes, enrollment is an issue. Enrollment is something we're going to look at capacity. But I want to make sure that this also is at the forefront, because here's the richness of program. These are things that we truly support today, but we didn't have a few years ago. The good news is we have them now. I just wanted to show another dimension of impact on how we're going to take data pieces and then operationalize them to see, well, are we being equitable? Where are we offering these opportunities for our students across our district? And I thought this is the visual that we're using to populate data points along, our sort of regional work that we're trying to do.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Trustee Taish, just to get back to your motion, your original motion, Trustee Singh had made an amendment to it, and I don't know that we ever got back to whether you agree with that or not.
Well, what I would suggest is that we go ahead and vote on my amendment, and then if it fails, we can take up Trustee Singh's amendment so that we can move this process along.
Sure. No, so Trustee Taish made a motion to add item 2H, and Trustee Matthias seconded that motion to create H to cap the percentage of economically disadvantaged students experiencing consolidation to no more than 53%. There was no other motion, so I think we need to vote on this one. Yeah, it's still an amendment to the original motion of the passing the guiding principles. So all those in favor of Trustee Taish's motion to amend the guiding principles, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. 4. All those opposed? So the motion fails 4 yes and 5 no. So Trustee Singh, did you have a motion?
I move to cap the percentage of economically disadvantaged students experiencing school closures after more information has been received and the equity officer has been hired.
So just a point of clarification to your motion. Is that a motion to amend the document, or is that a motion to direct the administration?
That is to amend the document.
Okay.
To whatever Trustee Tice was going to be.
2H.
Yes.
Okay.
Certainly happy to second that.
Okay, so Trustee Singh's motion, and then Trustee Matthias seconded. Any discussion on that particular motion? If not, all those in favor of Trustee Singh's motion, please raise your right hand. 3, 4, 5. Okay. All those opposed? 2, 3, 4. So the motion passes 5 yes, 4 no. It was Cindy. Okay, so trustees, we're back to the motion of passing the guiding principles. Any other discussion around this item?
Around the item of the document?
now we're talking the entire guiding principles. So there was there's a motion by,
Sure.
there was a motion by Secretary Ellens and a second by Trustee Teich to approve agenda item 13.2. And then we've had amendments to that motion. Trustee Matthias?
Sure. I just want to publicly thank Vice President Anderson for helping us to avert a catastrophe this evening. We were heading to a 5-4 split on the vote of this, on the guiding principles, with some trustees feeling that equity is not a value to this board. So glad that in the end we're able to at least come up with some language that's a bit of a compromise for us to be able to, for at least this trustee to be able to vote in favor of this document while we as a district figure out what equity means, if anything, to us, and while we plan our approach to such difficult conversations as institutional racism.
Thank you. Any other comments before we vote? I think I just had one comment, which is that I really appreciate the trustees and all of the engagement around the guiding principles document. And I think this is one step along the journey to get to October. And I don't know that anyone on this board is not interested in the rigorous academic core curriculum, or looking at socioeconomic balanced schools, or mitigating the transportation issues, I think, Trustee Wagner, that you raised, or the issue of impacting economically disadvantaged students that look like Trustee Cindy Anderson or myself. I think this is all and Letitia Anderson, sorry. Oh, or like all means all. So it's all students. But I think it's really important that we have this discussion, and we gave it as much time as we needed. So with that, all those in favor of approving the guiding principles, please raise your right hand. 3, 4, 5, 6. All those in favor raise their right hand again. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so that's 8-4. And all those against? And all those abstaining? So the motion passes 8-4, 0 against, and 1 abstaining. So thank you all, trustees. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?